My name is Nick Bracks, and I'm today chatting to Inez Willox, and we're just going to be having a general chat about the work we do in both of our industries and see what comes up. So I guess I'll give a quick introduction of myself, and then
you can. For it.
I'll go first. So I work in the mental health industry. I've gone down a really varied path to get there. I've tried a whole range of different things, been involved in a range of different startups, and really found my passion in two areas, which is mental health and acting, which I'm actively pursuing both of them now. And yeah, it's definitely been a tumultuous sort of path to get there, but like everyone, I guess it takes a lot of trial and error to find what you want to do, and that's the area that I'm interested in working in, and probably we'll talk a little bit about today. So I'll let you.
Good. And I'm Inez Willox. I'm the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group. That's my day job. So I look after a whole lot of industries across Australia and have insights into big parts of the Australian economy. I also sit on the board of Australian Super, which is Australia's biggest industry super fund. I have $130 billion in investments there, and I have a whole range of other activities. How did I get here? It's through a path through journalism and diplomacy and working in corporates and just having a whole range of different experiences both in Australia and living in Asia and in the United States as well. So it's been a bit of a winding path. I wouldn't say tumultuous, but it's been winding, and it's been up some hills and down some dales.
Yeah.
So how did you get into mental health?
I got into mental health. I suffered depression myself. I've always had a very active mind. When I finished up at high school, I went through a really bad period for about 3 years where I was off the rails, didn't know who I was, didn't really know what I wanted, and couldn't see a future. And it just went on and on and on, and it was linked to a whole range of different things that I dealt with growing up, insecurity issues, being, like I said, overthinking and being very obsessive, I guess, about how I saw life. And it was only because I went through that experience, and when I came through the other end, I wound up in the media and had the opportunity to speak about what I had gone through, and that led to me getting asked to talk at different schools and share my story, and I had a really good response. The kids were coming up and saying, thank you so much for sharing that story. That really helped me. That led to me going and getting help and speaking to someone, and I found that incredibly important to learn, I guess, how big of an issue it was, and it just organically built, and I kept running these seminars. I got trained as a facilitator in sort of behaviour change, and it's been an area throughout doing other things that I've just stuck at.
But mental health's always been an issue right through history, but it seems to be accepted much more as being an issue in the broader community. Why is that, do you think?
It's accepted more. Well, there's more of a conversation about it now. I mean, there still is a stigma, but I guess in the last 10 years, the progress that has been made is enormous. People are more open to talk about it. I think with men especially, there's it's really tough. Men have traditionally been made to feel that we shouldn't show emotion.
Suck it up.
Suck it up and get on with it, yeah. And that's slowly changing. It's still an issue, especially in more rural sort of areas. There is still that stigma, but again, if you look at the progress, it's enormous. And I really think the next step is more, how can we make practical day-to-day solutions through technology, through different platforms that across the board can give people the tools to actually make daily change. Because it's one thing to have the awareness about it, but then to actually be able to implement that, that's a whole another thing, and that takes behaviour change, that takes habit formation and, day-to-day practice. So
there's been a lot with like sports people and business people very recently coming forward and saying they've got mental health problems and needing time out.
Yeah.
People sort of suffering more from stress and burnout. So is it a factor of the life we lead these days? They're being bombarded with information and different platforms. You mentioned those. So how's that all impacting on kids' health?
I think majorly. I just actually I was in Bali the last week for 6 days on my own because I was actually getting a bit overwhelmed with everything I've been doing and turning my brain off, turning off social media. I felt like myself again after about a day.
Yeah.
And I was talking to, I've been to Africa and Bali last week, talking to the Indonesians over there. Yeah. Their philosophy on life is so simple. And they seem genuinely happy they make a point about living the most simple life possible. And I think in our society, we live in such a commercially driven culture that it's always what's next. How can I be perceived to be successful in the eyes of the public? Whether that for an athlete, they're spending their whole life trying to achieve at this high level, and then when that goes away, you're questioning, who am I? What's my identity? Because you've identified yourself as this athlete. So great to achieve things and have passions, but I think before we go too far into that, it's so important. And I think in education, it's something I'm so passionate about. There needing to be more for kids, education around how can we understand emotions, resilience, behaviour change, all those kind of things, relationships, that we have to learn through trial and error. And often it's too late. People get to the point where they commit suicide. So it's a big issue, and it's not an easy thing to change. But I think a lot of it is driven through social media as well, and you see that in schools and cyberbullying and comparing yourself to others. There's a whole range of issues, and I actually think it's pretty terrifying. What is going to happen with this next generation of kids, because they're growing up, with their glued to a phone. I was lucky that I just missed that boat where I was still.
No, I totally missed.
You totally, which is great. No, yeah, exactly. And growing up,
But I get bullied every day in social media, in the job I do. I mean, I get stuff said about me that's just horrendous.
Yeah, how do you handle that?
Well, I don't look at it.
Yeah.
I just don't look
disengage.
at it. I know it's there, and somebody every now and then will say, oh, did you see something X or Y was written about you, or something you said? People get stuck into you. And so I just turn it off, and I don't look at it. And it would be deeply destructive to my family, my kids. And they're more aware of it than I am, because they're more into it than me. But I think it's trying to teach kids to not get sucked into that. And the best way I heard it described was being like people's dinner time, kitchen table conversations sort of being put out to the whole world. When you say, oh, well, he's an idiot, or he's a dickhead, or whatever, and then it becomes public, and then you get the pile on. So how do you get kids just to either switch off from it, or ignore it, or just not get victimised by it?
Yeah, that's a big question, which the other problem is these are highly addictive. Like I was at a school the other day, and I was listening to a speaker, and he was talking about how conditioned kids are becoming on these platforms. Every time you're looking at opening up social media, getting a like, whatever it is, it's releasing dopamine, and it is as addictive as a drug or as alcohol. And I think there's going to have to be in the future laws around how these platforms are used, because it's terrifying. You're fueling, as a kid's brain is developing, they're fueling this addictive behaviour, and that stuff is very hard to change. And
it's an addiction.
It's an addiction.
Time you're preying on their greatest vulnerability. Basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's the role of philanthropy in this? I'll get my word around that word. What is the role for philanthropy in this, in trying to raise awareness and deal with some of the issues?
In terms of what I do? So I'm not qualified, as I'm not a psychologist or from that background. But
with your interest.
But what I do is really it's a 1 hour seminar where I go to, I'll tailor it for whether it's a company, a school, whatever organisation I'm at. And half of it is normally a personal story where it's a lived experience, and I've developed that.
Personalise it.
I personalise it, and I've developed that over time. And really, what I've learned is, I think that's the most effective thing to get people's attention. I've just made the story as raw and engaging and as relatable as possible, and that seems to cut through. And then I'll sort of tie it in with whatever I'm talking about on that day, whether it's about resilience type conversation or stuff to do with emotion, whatever it is. So it'll generally be a seminar like that. I've also got an app that I've developed called Happy Waves, which is a behaviour change platform where we've recorded mindfulness content with a range of the best teachers in Australia. So there's about 20 teachers at the moment. So each teacher will be from a background where they specialise in, for example, one of the courses will be on anxiety or relationships or performance for athletes, whatever it is, but within that realm. So, that's what I'm doing at the moment, and just trying to learn and meet as many people and get involved in different initiatives in that area.
So that word resilience, I hear it a lot. in what I do, because I work a lot with employers, and they say a couple of things. I'll be really interested in your view on this, that, well, I'll call them kids, and they're not kids, but for the purpose of this conversation, kids these days, when they emerge from school or uni, there are always issues around employability, right? And part of the concern is things like ability to work in teams, ability to work across projects, communication skills, which I think comes back to this sort of issue around being addicted to screens and the like, and not actually getting out and kicking a footy like maybe a lot of people did before. But the other word that comes up all the time is resilience. What does resilience mean to you?
Resilience to me is being able to just push forward regardless of what life throws at you, being able to work through really difficult times. When we are in a really bad situation or a rut, or our emotions get the better of us, it can often, it can feel, I've been through it and I've dealt with people and I've met people who've been through it, and I know how debilitating that can be. So I think resilience is reminding yourself in those times that, yes, this is bad at the moment, but this isn't what defines me. This isn't forever. Everything, comes and goes. Life itself comes and goes, and we can get through things. And an emotion, no matter how severe it is, does not last forever. And the same with when you're feeling happy or you're getting at a high, that doesn't last forever either. So it's just acknowledging that, that's part of life. And I think every single human on the planet, no matter what position they're in, does have ups and downs and have different difficulties, and from the outside it might not look like it, but everyone's got their own personal battles that they have to fight through. So
Well, I always remember one of the sort of most insightful things someone ever said to me was that things are never as good or as bad as they seem to be, and I think that's true.
I think that's so true. I think that's like a really insightful thing, isn't it? Because we're often looking at always comparing ourselves to other people, and there's no perfect way to live life. Every single possibility that there is to live life is going to come with great benefits and great difficulties, and there's positive and negative. And I think we are conditioned now as a society to look for that perfect life, and that just does not exist, and that's what needs to change.
Oh, you let me down.
Well, I don't think it does.
No,
if someone can show me.
No. But that's again coming back to image.
Yeah,
there's a lot of image building going on.
It's terrible. Yeah. It's not life. It's not real.
When you're doing it tough, either mentally or physically, or you're out of work, or you've got family problems or the like, this sort of endless search for perfection is
you're making. Well, life's hard enough without putting that extra layer on it, and then you add that to it. We're trying to make our lives 10 times harder than we need to. Yeah. It's already hard enough. Yeah.
So as a young guy, I mean, what do you think the future of work is for people? How do you see that evolving?
I mean, I might need to ask you that question in a second. I feel, look, I guess it's interesting. It'll be, I think, a lot of traditional jobs are going to become, redundant, or there's going to be less opportunities in certain areas, many more opportunities in technology-driven fields.
So does that scare you?
Personally, for me, it's probably for the future of, it does a little bit. In terms of what I want to do in life, it doesn't scare me career-wise, because I guess I've found what I love doing, which is working in the mental health area, doing acting, things like that, which I don't think are going to go away. But I think in general, it's a scary thing, and I think things are changing so rapidly that it's hard to even know. I guess, jobs that people are going to be doing in 20 years' time, some of them we probably can't even think of.
We don't know what it's going to be.
Don't even know.
That's the issue. We have no clue about where employment's going.
Yeah.
And it's going to be all technology driven.
Yeah.
But where that's going to take us. So
it is scary, isn't it? It's
well, we saw the sort of the internet revolution of the late 90s when you were a little tacker.
Yeah.
So, and that led to enormous changes in technological advance. And so, you talked about having an app. 10 years ago, we didn't have apps.
That didn't exist,
It didn't even have that technology.
Wasn't even a thing.
So that will take jobs, that push down technology around, clean technology, changes energy use, robotics, artificial intelligence, data, sensor technology, all of those are going to come to the fore. So where I have a problem at the moment, where my real problem is at the moment, Nick, is that the education system is running behind. It's running a generation at least behind. And there are some people who would say that it's running a century behind to try to get young people job ready. So it said 70% of jobs in the future are going to require skills around maths or a technical skill or science-based. But you're only getting about 15% of kids at school doing courses in those areas. So how do you make that interesting for young people in your generation and younger even? You're getting old.
I am, Brad, yeah.
Sorry.
Not a kid anymore.
But how do you make it interesting for them so that they are job ready and they want to be participants in this workforce? And you used the word opportunity. It's all about opportunity. And we have to look at it that way, not be scared by it. We have to embrace it. I'm just not quite sure we're ready to embrace it yet. But look, any business, whether it's a manufacturing business, whether it's a finance business, whether it's a legal firm, an accounting firm, a construction business, they're all going down this path of digitalisation. And that's the world we're living in. So I think that's a natural follow-on from what kids have been brought up with. Screens, information flow. It's how do you manage it?
And I guess, like you said, it's going to probably take a lot of trial and error and quite a bit of time for the education system to catch up. But,
and they're struggling. They're doing their best. I talk a lot to university leaders who say, well, if you can't tell me what the job of the future is going to look like, how are we meant to prepare for that?
It's hard.
But it's a challenge they have to have. And it's interesting though, because while we've got all those technical skills that business is starting to call out for, and they're called STEM skills, there's a big talk around wanting STEAM skills, so science, technological education, arts, and maths. And the arts is the creative thinking, the ability to communicate, be analytical, think a little bit outside the box. That's what business is looking for. So it's a big combination, and it's a different combination to what I grew up with. And you know, I was probably the last of the non-computer generation in school. I remember being amazed when when I was working as a journalist, we got our first computer screens. I would say that was about 1985 or 6, and we shared a computer, like terminal. It wasn't a computer, it was a word processor, and then had to turn it around and take our turn. This was like, wow, you know, this was like, whoa, this is cutting edge. You see it in all the old movies, by the way. But now it's just advanced so fast, and you've got to have the kids of the future to be resilient, to use your word, because they're going to have to be more adaptable than ever.
It's a completely different thing, because I guess, you know, when you were growing up, it would have been more set in career paths and does that
job for life?
And do you think, you know, if you were, for example, sort of entering the market now, compared to how it is, do you see that as, I guess, being a lot more stressful and difficult in finding, you know, what path to go down? Because people are, I guess, jumping, you know, from different careers, and it's kind of hard. You know, it's like you want to be able to establish yourself in one area, but that's harder than ever to do.
And it is harder, and then you become skilled in or really proficient in one area, and then there's so much change in that area as well. So you've got to keep up. It's not as if you finished uni and then you get a career. You become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, and that's your job for life. And not much changes. Now it's all about, we talk a lot more about lifelong learning, and we can see like universities going down the path and higher education institutions going down the path of just not having one degree, but having little bits of degrees, really specialised. And then people having to come back later in life to update their skills, renew their skills, or get different skills. And that's a whole different way of living than we've been used to, because completely. It's just been like you've been linear. And so I've got kids, and you know, it's been hard for them to make career choices, and it's been hard for them to crack into different careers. And at least one of them has started a career and said, no, that's not for me, and gone back and done something completely different. And that's brave. So you've got to be brave to do that. And that's, I suppose, where resilience comes in. But it's not a challenge I faced. Thank goodness.
Thank God, it's a different...
Yeah. But I get it, and I just we'll probably finish on mental health again because it's such an important issue. Can you see two questions from your perspective? Can you see mental health problems as a societal issue increasing as more people sort of, I'll say, own up to it or come forward? And then how do you think society as a whole is equipped to deal with it? Because I think it's going to be a bigger issue in the workplace.
I agree. Well, I mean, that's the scary thing about it. I can't see it going away. I think it is, with how, how society is progressing, I think it probably will become a bigger issue because we live in such a fast-paced world, and it's just so unpredictable. And all the pressures that it faces. So I can't really see it going away. I think the most critical thing to be done to prevent that is changing the education system or incorporating this kind of training into schooling and in our formal education, because I think preventative work is the most important thing to do, to actually educate people about how to look out for someone who's suffering from something, how to look for it in themselves, and how to change or how to look after their behaviour patterns when they do feel something happening. I think that's the most critical thing, because it won't go away. You can't eradicate it, and it's something that's been around forever, and it's more how do we learn to deal with it. For me, I've learned that exercise is just fundamental. Meditation, I meditate twice a day. I do that every day, and that's helped dramatically. It might be different for other people, but I mean,
you've got to find your place.
You've got to find what works. But it's a fascinating area, but it's a scary area, and sometimes from I'm always just thinking, why can't life just be more simple? And even in my own life, I'm like, well, I think I'm telling you I know what I want out of life, but then I've got all these different ideas, and it's like, God, does life really need to be this complicated? Like, we've got one time to live on this planet. Why can't we just, go and... But it's not as easy as that. There's a lot of factors that come into it. So it's a complicated area.
Oh, it is. And I was just going to say, look, when you're now getting a lot more blending of people working from home and working out of an office or coming into an office occasionally, you're getting a bigger blending of all their issues in their life coming into one. So it's harder for people to compartmentalize these days.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's where workplaces have a huge role, and my organisation is doing a lot more work. It's like never thought about this issue until 3 or 4 years ago. Doing a lot more work around trying to help businesses identify symptoms. How do they help their workforce to get through the occasional tough time? It's a big issue. And it doesn't last forever. But it's all about giving support, but and getting others within the workplace to recognise symptoms, but also to provide support without being overly sort of cloying about it. So it's a big issue.
And have you seen, with people working remotely or from home, have you seen that often will cause difficulties because they're isolated?
I think you look at what Australia went through in the early 2000s with the mining boom and a lot of fly-in, fly-out workers. The stresses that put on the worker and the family were enormous, and all the indications are that sort of mental health issues and problems as a result of that sort of working environment went through the roof. And that impacts, from a pure business point of view, it impacts on productivity, which is what business wants. So how do you address those sort of issues to help people through, recognise they're going through hard times, or it's almost an unnatural environment? I get it every day when I get on a plane 3 times a week. I think this is not real.
Not natural. Because I guess we're sort of biologically conditioned to be within our communities and within those groups supporting each other. It's what I find really hard about what I do as well. It's sort of been travelling around on my own doing talks, auditioning for acting jobs, doing the occasional acting job, and a huge amount of it is you're isolated.
Yeah.
And it's not normal. It's not.
But you're isolated on the one hand, but you're uber connected on the other.
It's a weird thing, yeah.
It's a strange thing.
Again, positives and negatives.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. So how do you manage it?
How do you manage it? And I guess just a final question for you: how do you sort of see for young Australians right now in the job community? What would you say that there's more opportunity than there ever has been, or it's because it's so competitive, or how would you see it now?
I think it's a really good question, and I think the answer is that there are now more opportunities than ever, because we are becoming increasingly globalised, and Australia is connected much more than it ever has been. We're part of a global economy, so there are huge opportunities there for young Australians to participate in what is rapidly changing jobs. Now, we were speaking about how we don't know what the jobs are going to be. We don't know either what jobs will disappear.
Yeah.
But some jobs naturally will. But that's always been how it has been through history. We don't have blacksmiths and tinsmiths anymore. We don't have street directories and all of that. The world is changing all the time. It's about how you take advantage of those opportunities. So it's about developing the right skills that give you an entry point, and then it's about getting your foot on the bottom rung of the ladder and getting started and getting in. But it is becoming harder. It's becoming more competitive, and I always say to young people, you might have the technical skills from a degree, but it's what else can you bring to the table? What other sort of skills do you have? It's that critical thinking, that's that analytical ability, it's the ability to communicate, to hold a conversation. All of those sort of what we call soft skills are what employers are looking for. And I think if you can, so it's a big ask, but you've got to develop the two sides of your brain, as it were. And finding points of difference from others who are competing and for jobs. But it's getting started, and then it all comes back to that resilience word. You get thrown up a whole lot of challenges, and you've got to work your way through it. I just remember one of my kids saying, when I asked them how to go on after about 3 months at work, saying, well, the hardest thing wasn't doing the work, it was actually being part of teams and cross-team communication and having a lot of information coming at you, and that's what we need to find ways to get our up-and-comers conditioned to work in that world. It's a different world to the world I lived in and worked in, but that's where we're going, and that's what we have to be part of. So there's enormous opportunities, but they're different opportunities to the ones you probably had, and definitely different to the ones I had.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. And I guess, final question from what you said as well, do you think the education system needs to be sort of recalibrated a little bit to deal with things like that? Because I know for myself, from going to university and other friends that I went through it with, I've really learnt everything, or not everything, but I feel like I've learnt more from real world experience, learning skills like what you're speaking about, creative skills, how to communicate, all those kind of things I learnt through trial and error, and that came through hardship and after finishing. I don't know if that should be incorporated more in our education.
I definitely think there's sort of a whole life skills course that we could teach, which is all those sort of skills you just mentioned, and then the basics of how to get around in the world that we operate in, and how to deal with social media, how to deal with connected media as a whole, all of those sort of skills that the education system doesn't pick up at the moment. I think it would be really important to get the basics in for kids, and that's probably the biggest thing that the education system could change at the moment, as well as it's sort of been set up in an old 19th century system where everyone sits still in rows and doesn't question and doesn't interact unless asked to. That's not how the world works these days. So it needs to update its thinking around those sort of areas as well. Building teamwork, building communications, building cross-cultural skills. We're a multicultural country. Build all of those skills. They're the skills that are going to hold young people in the biggest stead going forward.
For sure.
It's good. Good to
Great.
see you.
Great chatting to you. Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Nick.
you.
Cheers.
Thank
mate.
you. Awesome.
Cheers. Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.